Well, this morning we have a very special guest, one that needs no introduction, but I'll introduce him anyway. Mr. Lane Sebring. He and his wife have been a part of Good News for 18 months, and he has come to deliver a word on Sabbath. Would you guys go ahead and give a Good News welcome to Mr. Lane Sebring?
Hey. Well, I want to address the elephant in the room, okay? Yes, I cut my hair, okay? It was getting long, and it was hard to deal with, and so thanks for noticing. I appreciate it. But no, I broke my foot too. I was in Newport Beach, California, having a great time. Went to this software company. They brought me in to tell them how to run their company better. So I was feeling great. You know what I mean? And God just has this way of humbling you when that happens. I guess depending on your theology. But I'm heading to this mall because they're going to have this gala that night. I didn't have a jacket. I'm like, oh, I'm going to get me a jacket, and I'm going to be even more of a superstar tonight. It's going to be great. So I'm walking over to this mall, step off of the curb, and there's a fancy hotel, so it has these little fancy lights on the ground, little domes. And so I stepped on it and twisted my foot, and it just ruined all my plans because my foot broke. And so that was a fun flight the next day. I flew from LAX to Atlanta to ECP, and didn't have my fancy Lieutenant Dan leg. I had nothing. I hadn't seen a doctor yet, so I was hobbling around the airports. But here's the cool thing. The general public, they're so accommodating. When you have something that slows you down, they're just so patient, and kind. And I was just taken aback, I'll tell you, taken aback. I was not taken aback. All right, so we're going to talk about Sabbath. And as we get into this, I want to ask you this question. How many of you have ever had this kind of thought? Has this ever been your experience? That if I'm not accomplishing something, then I'm wasting time. Has anyone ever felt that way? If I'm not accomplishing something, I'm wasting time. Even right now, your fingers are itching to grab your phone and just check something, right? Because you're like, this guy's got a broken foot. It's going to be boring. I'm going to see what's going on Instagram. Because there's something about our constant need to be connected, to be productive. And this happens to all of us. In fact, I would argue that in our culture, there's this kind of predominant way of thinking that busy equals important. Busy equals important. In fact, anytime somebody wants to, grab lunch with me or coffee, I'm sure that you get this too. When somebody says, hey, let's get together, they'll say something like, I know you're such a busy guy. I know you're such a busy gal, or whatever, how you talk to me. I don't know, but you're busy. And the tendency is to say, why, yes, I am. I'm so busy, right? Because we almost feel like a guilt. If you're in just one of those seasons where maybe you're not as busy, you feel like, well, I should act busy, because if I'm not busy, I'm lazy, right? Busy equals important, not busy equals lazy. So this foot has slowed me down, and it's been kind of hard. We always joke about how God sometimes, you'll be writing a sermon and something will happen that makes the thing you're teaching just more acute and clear. And it's like God teaches you a lesson. I like the ones that happen that week and then are over as soon as I preach the sermon, right? This is going to be 6 weeks of recovery. And it's great timing because we're moving tomorrow. And so it's just been, it could not have been better. You know what I mean? It's amazing timing. And so I have this thing about me where if I'm not useful, if I don't feel useful and I don't feel helpful, I feel worthless, right? And so I'm an Enneagram 3 wing 2. If you're into that, you know that as an Enneagram 3, I'm performative. That's why you're laughing, because I want you to like me. And then 2, wing 2, I'm helpful. So I want to be performative, make everybody love me, and be helpful at the same time. Well, I can't do that as well with a broken foot, because if I put weight on it, I'm going to need surgery, and that 6 weeks is going to turn into 6 months. So I'm being careful. So what that means is that I have to just let a lot of things happen around me that I normally would step into, but I can't. So my wife and I, we went to the Haven House up here to donate some items, and we pull up, and all I can think about is I'm sitting in the passenger seat of our beautiful Honda Odyssey Touring 2022, and because I can't drive, because I have this foot, this is my right foot, I can't drive, so I'm sitting in the passenger seat, and my wife gets out, opens up the hatch. It's automatic. It's an Odyssey, you know what I mean? But it opens up, and she's having to physically carry these items and set them down, and I'm thinking all these people, all they're gonna think is look at that worthless piece of trash sitting there. So the guy comes out to help her, and I roll my window down. I'm like, hey, just so you know, I would help. I got a broken foot. And he's like, dude, I don't care. I'm just, whatever, man. And so like I roll my window up, and I'm like, I'm even more, embarrassed now. We got gas, and that was even worse because I'm sitting there, my wife's pumping gas, okay? And I'm looking around trying to make sure that nobody attacks her and nobody judges me, So I'm like, I will hobble out of this car and attack you back if you attack my wife. And if you judge me, how dare you, okay? So I can't be the only one. At least I don't want to feel like I'm the only one, okay? We have this kind of, if I'm not busy, it must mean I'm lazy. And if I have any kind of weakness and I'm not useful or productive, then something is wrong. In fact, if you're successful, you're busy. The problem is this takes a toll on us. Overwork, the constant inability to shut it down, 24/7 connectivity. And this is not just connected to like your job. We have this thing in our culture where we're so active all the time. I have 4 kids. They're 9, 8, 6, and 4. Ages are always changing. It's hard to keep track. But there's a 5-year range. 9 is the highest. 4 is the youngest. I know that because my 4-year-old is constantly like, I'm full. She's got a little British accent, I guess. But if we weren't careful, if we weren't intentional, all we would ever do is just take our kids from one thing to another all the time. Gymnastics, cheernastics. That's a combination of cheer and gymnastics. Happens in the summer, and it's nonstop. If we didn't have any boundaries, and we're not special. That's everybody, no matter how old your kids are, it's everybody. Constant doing stuff. So not only do we work a lot of hours, but many of us find it difficult, if not impossible, to disconnect from all of that, whether it's work-related overwork or just family and life, even when we're on vacation. I had this thing happen to me years ago. I worked at a church in the DC area, lived there for about 10 years, worked at this church, and if you're not familiar with that part of the country, a lot of people that live there are really, really into their work. They work a lot, they want to prove themselves, they want to get ahead, and so the work culture is very intense. And so I was always a little bit insecure working at a church because people already think we only work 1 day a week, which is not true. We work 2. Sometimes we do stuff on Wednesdays. So I already had this kind of complex of like, okay, these people already think I'm lazy because I'm their youth pastors, and their kids' youth pastors. Like, what is he doing? And so I wanted to prove myself like, no, I work just as hard as you. So we hired this guy, our church, who was like this heavy hitter. He built companies, sold them to like massive Fortune 50 companies, and then they would bring him on to be a senior executive for like 5 years, and he'd build another company and sell it to another. And so he was just a big deal. And somehow we got him to like take a like 99% pay cut and come be our executive pastor, which basically what that means, come boss us around for a year. And so he did that, and so I wanted him to like me because I really liked him, and I thought he was cool, and I was like, man, I want this guy I want him to be proud of me. I want him to be like, man, Lane's different from all these other scrubs. Like Lane, he gets it. And so I did everything I could to like prove to him like, no, I work really hard just like you, And so one day I'm about to go on vacation. I'm overwhelmed. I'm exhausted because believe it or not, we do work more than 1 day a week. We had a lot going on, and I'm so excited to be going on vacation. And right before I leave, like the day before I leave, he says, hey, he pulls me aside. He says, hey, now I know you're going to the beach, and I know you're going to be on vacation, but here's what he says, exact quote, every man is always thinking about work, even when he's on vacation. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about these items. He gave me a book to read. It's like 400 pages. Why would I do that? So I got homework and a book report on vacation. And I'm going, and I'm like, so he's saying all this, and my soul is I'm just dying inside because I'm like, okay, I got to figure out a way to cram all this in before I go on vacation so that I can come back and report back to him, yes, I ruined my vacation by doing all your assignments. And so like this pressure of I got to go, even on vacation, I can't escape my work. And he even said like every man. He didn't even say person. He said man, like it's a part of my manhood to work. It goes deep. It's this identity that we all struggle with. Man, woman, doesn't matter. There's this idea that if I'm important, if I'm successful, it's going to mean I'm busy. And just so you know that I'm not the only one, I got some stats for you. These are from the Mauve Chan agency. 70% of people experienced mental health issues due to overworking, with 43% suffering with anxiety, and 1 in 8 turning to harmful substances, caffeine, okay? 2 out of 3 of workers have experienced alarming physical health issues such as chronic pain, a weakened immune system, a broken foot caused by overworking. All right? 54% of people work while, okay, these 2 stats are going to blow your mind. You ready for this? This is amazing. 54% of people work on vacation, and 47% feel guilty if they don't work on vacation. So like literally everybody's vacation is ruined, either by working or feeling bad they're not working. 34% of people choose to work while on vacation because they love their job. However, 29% of people work for fear of losing their job. And we're going to talk about this idea later when we get into Sabbath, that Sabbath is a intentional practice of trust. And one of the things that happens when we work on vacation is we are not practicing trust, we're practicing fear. 63% of people feel anxious if they don't check work-related messages while on vacation. 59% of people struggle to switch off from work while on vacation. 86% of people receive relaxation, I love this language, relaxation disrupting calls and messages from colleagues while on vacation. I was talking through this with my wife, and she said, 100% of moms experience relaxation disrupting calls and messages from their kids 24/7. So there you go. So no one is immune from this culture that we find ourselves in. We wake up and we find ourselves in this place where it is so normal to overwork and to push through whatever comes that we don't even see it. And we think that is normal, to go on a vacation and have it not do what it's supposed to do because we cannot disconnect. So we're going to discover, with that as kind of the backdrop, that God has a better way. Did you see how I did that? It's the title of the series. God has a better way. There's a way of approaching our work, our obligations, our schedule with a built-in practice of Sabbath rest. So here's kind of the big idea for today that I want us to look at. When I practice Sabbath, I stop striving and start trusting. When I practice Sabbath, I stop striving and start trusting. So we're going to go through 3 things here. We're going to look at what is the Sabbath, because we need to define it. We need to look at what do we mean when we say Sabbath? What does the scripture teach around the idea of Sabbath? So we're going to look at what it is. We're going to look at why we should practice Sabbath. So not only what it is, but why should we do it? And then how, because I don't want to leave you just with you should, without some practical tools of how to do it. So let's look at this first question. What is the Sabbath? It goes all the way back to the creation account in Genesis 2. Here's what it says. Thus, the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the 7th day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the 7th day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the 7th day, made it holy, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. So from the very start in the creation account, we see God choosing to model a balance of work and rest. He worked, building out the world, and then he rested. And it's not like God needed to take a nap. You know what I mean? It's not like God needed restorative rest. Like God was like, wow, that was exhausting. I need to kick back. He was modeling something for us, that there has to be a balance. And so we see this built out and even codified into Old Testament law in Exodus 20 when it's in the 10 Commandments. So the 10 Commandments were given to Moses. He presented it to the people. And here's where we see it. Exodus 20, verse 8. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord. On it you shall not do any work. Verse 11. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So here we have in the 10 Commandments this unusual commandment in the middle of it. Thou shalt take a day off, right? And this is a commandment that none of us have ever felt guilty for breaking, right? It's not like you've been talking to your friends and you've been kind of having one of those vulnerable moments where everybody's kind of saying, here's what I struggle with. And one of your friends says, I cheated. And your other friend says, I lied. And you said, I skipped my nap, Like, I feel terrible. Like, that's never happened, but this is in the 10 Commandments. The word Sabbath is actually a noun that comes from a verb that means rest or don't work. So Sabbath literally means practice seeking rest. It's the intentional practice of resting. And it's the command. The command is the balance of work. It's like we work and we rest. There's two sides of this commandment. The one side is you're going to work 6 days a week and you're going to rest. And if one of those things is out of balance, it makes for an out of balance life. A life that is complete leisure is unfulfilling. And a life that is complete work is overwhelming. You need a balance of both. And a lot of people, talk about wanting to come to the beach and sell their business and sit on the beach for the rest of their life. And if you've ever done that, and I haven't, but what I'm saying is, from what I've heard, if you do that, that's fun for about a week, maybe 2, and then you're building another business because it's not fulfilling to just rest all the time, in the same way that it's overwhelming and untenable to just work all the time. You have to have a balance. And so God gives this command of this balance of work and rest. 6 days we work, 1 day we rest. And here's how this would have landed on these people. So you have to think, they were a 24/7 culture. They were in servitude to the Egyptians. They're coming out of captivity. They took care of themselves when they could. And in this culture, if you didn't work on a certain day, you didn't eat that day. There was no refrigeration. It's not like they had pantries full of stuff. They could just go to Costco and stock up. No, they couldn't. They were like us. They were in a Costco desert. There was no Costco. They just had Sam's. And so this is good enough, I guess. But like for them, it was legit worse than that, if you can imagine. They had, I'm actually kind of proud of Sam's. They do a good job. Anyway, I digress. So in this culture where it's constant, like if I don't produce, if I stop, then the provisions stop. And that's a scary place to be. So you just never stop. And in that, God says, no, I need you, knowing the backdrop of the culture in which you live and the reality that you face, I need you to rest 1 day a week. And they would have said, no way. I can't believe this is a commandment. And so when you hear this, right, and you feel the same way, when you think, no, I've got obligations with my kids, I'm taking them all over the place, I've got work, I've run a business, I understand they would have felt the exact same way. There is nothing new or unique about that. It's just the backdrop and the culture and the situation has changed, but the principle still remains. And so before we get into like why we practice Sabbath, I do want to mention that there are different ways to view Sabbath, right? Which day, is it Saturday, is it Sunday? What does it mean to work? What counts as work? Is it still binding? It's interesting, all the commandments are repeated in the New Testament except this one. This one is implied, and we're even going to see in a little bit that Jesus is not really legalistic about this commandment. And so we're not going to get into any of those questions. Just know that it is hotly debated. It could be its own sermon series. I'll let Brad handle that. I won't touch that today. But just know the principle still applies to us, that we have a God who modeled work and rest, put this into the way things are supposed to be. And here's what I want us to see, that practicing rest is for our good. So we're not going to get hung up on the nuance of like, is this a command we have to follow? Because Jesus is going to give some clarity to that later, and I think it's going to really help. So what is the Sabbath? It's the practice of seeking rest. So why should we practice Sabbath? I'm going to give you 2 reasons that I think are pretty compelling. Here we go. Why should we practice? There's a verse that I love that really, really encapsulates this idea. It's in Psalm 4:8. The psalmist says this, in peace, everybody say peace. Peace. I didn't get to participate in the dad jokes last week. Were anybody here last week for Father's Day? So there was like dad jokes that everybody got to do. Somehow I missed this because I was breaking my foot in California. But here's my dad joke. Are you ready for it? I didn't used to believe in orthopedic shoes, but I stand corrected. So there you go. All right. Let's see. In peace, I will both lie down and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. Here's what he's saying. I will have peace. In other words, I will be at rest, and I will even lie down and sleep. If you think about it, the most vulnerable position any one of us puts ourselves in is when we close our eyes and we sleep. Because it is in that position that we have no defenses. We are completely vulnerable. And he's saying, I'm going to do that in peace because you make me dwell in safety. You are my provider. You are my protector. Sabbath rest is the same principle. It is, in a world that never stops, I'm going to intentionally stop and rest because God is my provider. So practicing Sabbath reminds me that God is my provider. Practicing Sabbath reminds me that God is my provider. In the break that we take, we are practicing dependence on God. We are choosing to trust. Which reminds me of how I'm really like, for lunch today, I don't know if you thought about lunch, but I would really love Chick-fil-A. Anybody else want to go to Chick-fil-A today? It's great, isn't it? So like half of you were like, yeah, let's go to Chick-fil-A, and the other half were like, no, it's closed. And then the first half, when you realized it was closed, you're like, no, right? But Chick-fil-A is closed on Sunday because of this principle. And it is so not a thing in fast food to be closed on Sunday, which Chick-fil-A would correct me and say they're quick service, not fast food, because they're better than fast food, according to them. But they are closed on Sunday as a way to practice the Sabbath. And here's what's crazy. Even with only being open 6 days a week instead of 7, they still have the highest per store revenue of any quick service restaurant. It's not even close. Not total revenue, per store, because they just crush on those 6 days. And so this is a principle that's played out, that you can actually, in some ways, accomplish even more in those 6 days than 7, because God will provide, and he does provide. Then we're gonna look at this next verse. So the first reason is practicing Sabbath reminds me that God is my provider. The second reason is found in Mark 2. So here we have where Jesus is with his disciples, and this is one of the only mentions that we get of, or one of the few mentions that we get of the Sabbath with Jesus. So Jesus and his disciples are picking grain, and it happens to be the Sabbath. So the Pharisees come, and they're all upset. They're always trying to get Jesus. They were the political and religious leaders of the day. They come to Jesus, and they're like, wait a second, you guys are, picking grains, and it's the Sabbath. How dare you? And Jesus comes back with this just amazingly profound statement. He says, then he said to them, Mark 2:27, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. In other words, he's saying, you've got this confused. You think that you're in servitude to this command. It's the other way around. This command was given for you. This is for your benefit. This is to benefit you. So the next principle of why we should practice the Sabbath is that practicing Sabbath is for my benefit. It's not something that I'm supposed to dread. It's not something that I'm supposed to look at like out of a sense of ought, like, oh, I have to practice Sabbath. No, I get to, and this is for me. This provides a much needed recovery and restorative rest. So I go to the gym every morning, and now that I have a broken foot, I basically just do upper body. So pretty soon I'm going to look like even more like Gru, from Despicable Me. Which is going to be great. So basically all I can do every day is like one day I do like chest and, like tries. And the next day I do back and bis, and then I go back to chest. So it's like just bouncing back and forth. But I've found that I need like a longer break between muscle groups, because if you know anything about the way muscles work, is you break them down and they have to recover. If you just keep working the same muscle every single day, it never has a chance to recover. It doesn't build back to be stronger, and you end up damaging it, and you don't get the growth. It's a physical law. If you ever trained for a marathon, you might run 3 days in a row, take a day off, run 4 days in a row, take 2 days off. You don't run hard every single day, because if you get to the marathon day and you've done that, your body hasn't had a chance to recover and to come back stronger. So this is a principle that's a physical principle. It's a spiritual principle. And so when God speaks into this and he says, this is for you, you're not for it, what he's saying is that you can benefit from this in a way that's for you. So before we get into the third question of how, I want to address something, because we looked at what Sabbath is, right? We looked at why we should practice it. The tension that I feel with this, when we get into how, is that not everybody has a 9-to-5 job that they can just, okay, I'll take a vacation from my job. If you're a stay-at-home parent, there is no vacation, right? Like if you just decide, like, I'm just going to turn it off for a day, your kids will probably burn your house down if they're my kids' age, and then they'll get taken away from you, and that won't be good, right? So like, there has to be something. My wife and I, when we were talking about this, she said, there's got to be, like, is this for me? Is this for, because my wife stays at home and works in our home, and is this something that can apply to her as much as it applies to the person who has a job? I don't have a job. I run a business. Many of you who run businesses know that you can't just easily turn that off because it's your baby. And if you're not running it, then who is? If you don't have the systems to run it, and hopefully you do and all that kind of stuff. But I'm just saying that I don't want you to hear this and say, this doesn't apply to me because my situation is unique. I want to acknowledge that I understand that. And here's what I want to encourage you to do, and I want to encourage myself to do, is that as we look at these principles, I want us to think not, I can't do this, but how can I do this? How can this apply to me? And I'm going to give you some specific ways that hopefully will be practical and helpful. So number one, how can we practice Sabbath? Number one, choose a day of the week to intentionally rest from your normal work. So take a day and disconnect from whatever work you normally do. So if you do housework, maybe there's a day of the week where it's like, I'm just going to let the laundry pile up. I'm going to try to maybe we'll order out. We won't do dishes because it'll just be easier to let it go. Your income generating work, I'm going to cut off my email. I'm going to not participate in any work meetings. I'm going to turn it off. School work, maybe you're in school, you're in college, whatever, and you have every day of the week you're studying. There might be one day of the week where you say, I'm just not going to study on this day. Right? Running your business. Maybe you set up the systems to run without you so that you can take a day off. So choose a day and intentionally rest from your work. For those who work with your minds, right, knowledge work, you might want to rest with your hands. We want to change the definition of what rest necessarily means. If you're sitting at a desk all day, it might be restful for you to actually cook, garden, shop, do shop work. Go shop, I guess. I don't know. I just put shop. I don't know if I meant like work in a wood shop or go shop at Target. Take that how you will. Those who work with their hands, maybe you can sit down, read, take a nap, all right? So choose a day of the week and intentionally rest from your work. Number two, communicate your plan with the people who need to know. So this is where it gets a little tough. We have to set and communicate boundaries. And it may be that if you work in an environment where Sabbath is not practiced and not respected, and you have to be the one to step into that and say, this is how I'm choosing to live. So on Saturdays, I'm sorry, I'm turning my phone off and I'm not going to be reachable. And if the building catches on fire, somebody will let me know. But other than that, I'm off. That's scary. That takes a lot of boldness because there will be resistance. But it might be that you can set the tone for the culture changing. Plan out your time. Disconnect. One of the great killers of rest is social media, your phone. Like sometimes it's a matter of just disconnecting from the normal function of our day. This is where community comes in handy. So if you're not in a crew and not in a community, it's really, really helpful to be connected. Because if you have a situation where it's not so easy to just neglect your kids for a day, right? Like you just can't turn that off. Maybe there's someone that you can pair with and you can help support their rest and they can help support your rest so that both of you are able to practice Sabbath. When I broke my foot, I came back from my trip, my lawn needed to be mowed. It was overgrown. And so we're all like texting our neighbors trying to figure out if there's like some kid we can pay to come mow it. And two houses down is my neighbor Cole Floyd. He's the pastor at Chapel at the Beach in Rosemary. He just shows up with a mower and mows my lawn. That's crazy. Brad's never mowed my lawn, you know? like I don't know, maybe I should go to Chapel at the Beach. I was blown away. And so like he helped me in that way because I'm connected, because we have this community and we support each other. And so find that. Build that. There's a lot of things that we do at Good News to facilitate that kind of community. Doesn't happen overnight, but it's really powerful when you have it. Number three, get comfortable with the idea that it's okay to rest, and get comfortable with the idea that that this is not going to be normal to the people around you. There's going to be resistance, and that's okay. You are not the one that is out of line. You are in line with God's plan, and that is totally okay. So if you work outside the home or inside the home, you need rest. So fight for it. When I came back from vacation, and I had to give that guy the book report and homework and all that, a few months later, he goes on vacation. And when he does, we were in the middle of like this kind of pretty intense capital project, and he was managing it. And so the whole time he was on vacation, he was calling into every meeting. He was emailing us all day and all night, texting us all day and all night. And he comes back from his vacation, and he's exhausted, right? Because he really didn't have a vacation. And he says to me, he says, oh, when I was on, quote, vacation, like he was expressing that it was not really a break. It wasn't really restorative. It was just, there was nothing about it that was really what it was supposed to be. And in that moment, as a 20-something, kid who wants this guy to be impressed, somehow I mustered up the courage to tell him how I did things. And I said, hey, I think the reason why you refer to it as like, quote, vacation, you're so frustrated that it wasn't really a break, is because the way you do vacations stinks. It's like, it's not the way it's supposed to be done. I said, like, when I go on vacation, I completely shut off. Like, I make sure everything's set up and ready to go, and then I leave, and all my bases are covered, and I just try to enjoy myself so that when I come back, the vacation did what it's supposed to do. And he thought about it. And a few months later, he goes on vacation. And before he goes, he says, hey, I want to do what you do. This guy, he says, like, I haven't done this. I've never done this in 30 years of my professional life, but I'm going to try to disconnect when I'm on vacation. What do you do? I said, well, take your phone and throw it in a pile of water. And that's the first step. And I just walked him through, like, here's what you do. He goes on vacation. He comes back, and he says, Lane, we had the best time. He said, my wife told me she's never had me that present on a vacation. I've never been that with her. Like, she felt like she had me instead of just had me doing work on vacation. He said, this is like a gift. And this was a guy who, if anybody could say, oh, I'm hard driving, I work hard, I build businesses, it's him, and he did it. Because God used, some kid, because I was a kid at the time, 20-something kid, to help him understand this principle. So I want to encourage you, step into it and say, I know it's going to be hard. I know there's going to be resistance. I know it's impractical, but I'm going to trust in what God has for me. We'll close with this verse, Psalm 46:10. The psalmist says, be still and know that I am God. There is no better picture of Sabbath as God intended than to be still, knowing that he is God. He is our provider. He has provided this for our benefit. He will continue to keep running the universe without us. Everything will be fine, and we will be better off for it. Let's pray. God, thank you for your word. Thank you for giving us the ability to know you and to know your plan for us. And in a world, in a culture that is so driven to be productive at the expense of even our health, our mental health, our physical health, our well-being, God, give us the strength in that to find a better way and practice seeking rest the way that you've called us to. In Jesus' name, amen.